Car crash cases, defective products, dangerous drugs, injuries, and abuse. Across the state of Alabama, the attorneys, proudly sponsored by the law firm of Hollis Wright, are here to serve you. Your tough legal questions answered by our experts. The attorneys with Josh Wright from the law firm of Hollis Wright and host David Lamb.
Welcome into the attorneys. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Our topic of conversation is gun rights. You know, there's so much confusion about this issue. What are your rights? Where can you carry? Where can you not carry? Can you have them in your vehicle? All of those questions we're going to deal with in the next half hour. And the questions that you have for us, we would love to take them as well. Because again, this is a topic of conversation where there is a great deal of confusion. So call, text, email, that information on your screen. Also a reminder, the attorneys, something special about our show. For the next half hour, an attorney is standing by live to speak with you. So an opportunity for the next half hour to get some great live legal advice that you can count on. So take advantage of that conversation. Josh Wright is with the firm of Hollis Wright. Good to see you, sir.
You too. You too. Hope you had a great week.
I did. Thank you, sir.
You know, this is you let in correctly. I mean, this is a very relevant topic. It's a topic that impacts a lot of the viewing audience. Mm-hmm. You know, getting prepared for this show, like I have many of the other gun shows that we've done, there's always interesting statistics related to gun ownership, gun use, etc. We have 310 million guns in the United States, but only 314 million people. We have 5% of the population in the United States, and yet we have roughly 35 to 50% of the gun ownership in the country, or the world for that matter. Huge, just gigantic number of guns in our country. I'm not sure what that says about the country, but it is what it is. And so that's why we talk about topics like this. And when we do, we bring experts on, as we often do. And we've got Michael Hanle on from Jaffe, Hanle, Whisonant Knight, a law firm here in town. I just got to ask this question because I know that you are a great conversation piece when you go to like dinner parties, because people always want to talk about this stuff. They do. It's just, it's always in the news. People always have questions about what happens if this, what happens if this. So you've got to be a great conversation piece.
There's always something that wants to come up during those conversations about the practice of law and the people specifically that I often represent.
Michael, how did you get involved in, well, I know you do a lot of criminal law, but how did you get involved in this area and kind of become an expert in this area on gun rights?
Well, guns are a big thing in the state of Alabama. This is a state that hunts a lot. A lot of people own guns and possess firearms, and so a lot of the time my clients will have issues with guns. Can I own a gun? Can I possess a gun? If this happens, how does that impact my right to carry a gun?
This is a hot topic, and we have legislation that seems like each year down at the legislature related to open carry, permitting, who's responsible for permitting. Is it, you know, a violation of someone's civil rights or a violation of the Constitution not to allow them to permit? So, I mean, it's an issue that comes up quite a bit, doesn't it?
Absolutely. There is legislation on a regular basis in this state annually that deals with gun rights. We're a big proponent of the Second Amendment in the state of Alabama. There are a number of groups that lobby for those rights. And so politicians see the sensitivity in those issues and they bring them to the forefront as necessary.
So we hear about the Constitution, the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms. We've all heard that before on television, heard the political pundits talk about it. What really, kind of break that down for us, what really is the right that one has in a state like Alabama to bear arms? I mean, can you simply go buy as many guns as you want, of any type you want, or are there certain restrictions?
Well, there are certain restrictions that go along with the right to possess a firearm. The federal government has made certain firearms off limits. Assault rifles, automatic weapons are off limits, as are, you know, bazookas and those types of things that shoot missiles and projectiles, explosives. The states have tried to take some of the control from the federal government as far as what weapons are allowed. But in reality, you can go and buy as many firearms as you'd like.
What is the breakdown? I mean, you've got handguns, we've got rifles, shotguns. Is it a pretty equal distribution, you think?
No, by far I think that the majority of the handguns, the firearms that are purchased are handguns.
Okay.
Rifles, shotguns are typically associated with hunting. Handguns are more associated with personal protection.
Gotcha. Let's kind of talk in general about how there's an interplay between what you do from a criminal perspective in defending individuals that have been arrested and gun rights. Those things interplay with one another, do they not?
Absolutely.
For example, somebody's convicted of a felony, and I get this call a lot, and in fact, when we do these shows, we get this question a lot. If somebody has been convicted of a felony in the past, can they go get a permit to own a gun?
No. Very simply, they can't own a firearm if they've previously been convicted of a felony offense, and that's an offense which carries a year and a day minimum sentence. It is against the law by both Alabama standards and federal standards for a previously convicted individual to possess a firearm.
Now, if you're convicted of a misdemeanor, so a non-felony,
Correct.
Totally different answer?
No. In most regards, it's a different answer. Okay. However, the misdemeanor of domestic violence has found its way into federal law as a prohibited person. 18 United States Code Section 924C deals with those individuals who are prohibited from possessing a firearm, and one of the enumerated provisions is a person who's been convicted of a domestic violence offense.
What happens if you are convicted of a felony or you have a domestic violence conviction and there's a firearm in your home, but it's owned by a third party, owned by somebody else, owned by a girlfriend, a wife, whatever? What impact does that have, if anything?
Well, it depends. If the gun is simply in the home, it's not going to have any impact. However, if law enforcement for some reason has an occasion to be in the home and say they would find that firearm, you could potentially be charged with a violation of either state or federal law. The possession of that firearm in the home is considered to be joint by, say, my wife and myself. So I would be equally as liable for the possession of that firearm as say, my wife would, even though it's her gun.
Got a number of questions, as you might expect. A question here, you were talking about if you have a prior felony conviction, you can't possess a gun. But a question here, can I restore my rights to possess a gun? Is there any recourse if you've lost the right, can you get that back?
There is a procedure both federally and in the state of Alabama for the restoration of your rights. It's a little easier to do in Alabama. You would have to go through the Board of Pardons and Paroles, and you could restore your civil and political rights, right. And that would include the right to possess a firearm. The problem is that in the federal forum, it's a lot harder to get that right restored. ATF no longer has been funded to go through the process of restoring firearm rights, and they haven't done that in almost 20 years. Right. So although you could get a right to possess a firearm by the state of Alabama, it would still be illegal federally for you to possess that firearm.
Right. See, this is why you bring the experts on, so they can actually kind of unwrap this for us. All right, so we're probably getting ready to go to break here. When we get back, I want to talk about one of the hottest topics that has been significant in the news, in the media, over the last 3 to 4 years, and that is stand your ground on the right to self-defense. Let's kind of unwrap that when we come back from commercial break, because I think that's something that people are always asking questions about.
Absolutely. Interesting conversation tonight. Would love to have you join us. Here's how you can join the conversation. Also, find the firm of Hollis Wright on Facebook if you'll search that term, Hollis Wright, and on Twitter, it's Hollis_Wright. Gun rights, what you need to know on the attorney. Stay tuned. We're coming right back.
I'm Josh Wright with the law firm of Hollis Wright, a personal injury law firm. Thank you for watching The Attorneys. Now, we hope you, a friend, or a loved one never needs legal counsel for a case. But if you do, the goal of the show is simple. Provide answers and legal counsel when you need it the most. Your call to the show is free, so if you have questions specific to the show or related to other accident or injury-related topics, you can call, email, or text us. Or you can also follow us on Facebook or Twitter, or simply contact us by going to hollis-wright.com and click on the Contact Us link. We know your time is valuable, so thank you for spending it with us watching The Attorneys.
All about gun rights tonight on The Attorneys. Appreciate you being with us. A reminder, an attorney standing by live right now to speak with you. Take advantage of that opportunity to get some great legal advice. Josh?
You know, and I blew that firm fact coming in from break right there. I blew that statistic in the opening.
Did you?
When I said that we have 5% of the world's population, yet I think I said 35 to 50% of the country's guns. The reality is we have 5% of the population in the United States, and we have 35 to 50% of the world gun ownership.
Yeah.
So that should tell you something about the United States and how people feel about the Second Amendment and their right to bear arms
Serious
and right
about
to
it.
own stuff. They're
Yeah.
serious about it. All right, so when we left, really hot topic right now that's in the news. I know there's been some recent legislation in Alabama that the governor may have even signed into law that I want to talk about, and that is kind of this concept of self-defense and stand your right. Let's take it from this perspective. Explain, if you will, in general, what are a person's rights if they have a gun in their house and someone breaks into their house? Do they have the right to defend themselves in their own house? Let's start there, and then we'll work our way through the new legislation.
Well, what we call stand your ground rights originally come from the principle of the castle, the right to defend one's castle. So it was originally the castle laws. So yes, an individual has a right to be secure in his home. And that includes the right to possess a firearm and, under certain circumstances, to use that firearm to protect himself or a member of his family or somebody else who is a guest in his home.
What are the general rules about when it's appropriate to use deadly force in your house versus when it would not be appropriate? For example, I know you well know, as I do too in civil rights cases, that police officers often use a force continuum. You don't bring a gun to a fist fight, but you may bring a gun to a knife fight, right?
Correct.
What is the general premise of how that works in the home at night, for example, when you're trying to defend yourself and somebody breaks into your house?
It's different inside the home than it is outside the home. Because of that right, that principle that your home is your castle, you don't have to use consummate force, force versus force. If somebody breaks into your house, you have a right to use that firearm as you deem appropriate under those circumstances, which means that you can use deadly force inside of your home to protect yourself or your family.
Gotcha. All right, so let's talk about new legislation. How is a lot of times you'll see media coverage somewhere else, and then there'll be a law in Alabama that gets passed related to something that was seen on TV. I see that quite a bit. What changed in Alabama with the recent law that we had that changed?
Well, the stand your ground laws are actually the self-defense laws that are found at 13A 323 of the Alabama Code. Those laws were recently amended to take into consideration the principle of immunity. A person who uses lethal, deadly force has a right to a determination of whether or not they are immune from prosecution. Alabama's present understanding or the legal basis was that you may or may not be entitled to a pretrial determination, which means that the court would rule prior to the beginning of any trial. The recent legislation amended our statutes to include a provision that requires the court to hold a pretrial hearing on the issue of immunity. It was taken from, as you know, in civil cases, there's sometimes civil immunity. Yeah. And those issues are typically tried to be resolved early on in the case to be expeditious in how money is spent and judicial economy is done. So in our case, we have a pretrial determination. The defendant, the person charged with the crime, and it's typically going to be a murder, has the burden of proving that he has immunity in his case.
So if you have immunity under the new law, it never goes any further.
That is correct. And in fact, my firm handled the case within the past 6 months in Shelby County before Judge Reeves, before he retired, where we had a pretrial determination of immunity. Immunity was granted to our client, and Judge Reeves dismissed the murder case in that.
Interesting.
A couple of questions. I was trying to knock these out. The sheriff denied me a permit to carry a gun. Now what?
Well, you are presumed to have a right to carry a pistol, to carry a firearm. The sheriff, by statute, shall issue that permit. If he fails to issue that permit, then you have a right to appeal that decision to the district court. At the district court level, the sheriff would bear the burden of proving that you're not entitled to possess that firearm permit.
Do you have to have a permit to own a gun or a permit to carry a concealed weapon?
You don't have to have a permit to own a firearm.
Okay.
There are certain federal requirements, background checks that are in place before you can actually own that firearm, but you don't have to have a permit to own a gun. If you want to carry a firearm, you don't have to have a permit, as long as it's openly carried. If it is in a holster, if it is on your hip and it's secure, Alabama's an open carry state. If you wanted to conceal that firearm, if you wanted to have a pistol under your coat in a holster that was concealed, then you would have to have a permit.
What about in a vehicle? A question here, can I carry an unloaded weapon in my vehicle?
This comes a lot. Yeah, this comes up a lot.
Absolutely. There is no prohibition against carrying a firearm in your vehicle. We are all given that right to carry a firearm on our vehicle. So yes.
All right, so what happens if it's loaded? But it's on safety.
If it's loaded, it's another question. Do you have a permit to carry that pistol?
Okay.
And as long as it's open, then it's okay. If you've got it hidden inside of a glove box or in a box someplace in your car, you may have to have a carry permit, a concealed carry permit.
That's why sometimes if you get pulled over for a speeding ticket, you may hear, an officer ask the question, are there any firearms in your car? And that's a question that I always kind of wondered why people ask that. Now I know why, and they're obviously trying to defend themselves and whatnot. We have a lot of other issues to talk about. I want to talk a little bit more when we come back from break about the concealed versus unconcealed weapon concept and how that kind of works in practice.
All right, we'll do that. We'll take our final break of the evening. Just a few minutes remaining. Join the conversation. I know you have questions out there. Now's the time to get them answered. Here's how you can join our conversation. Also, an attorney standing by for just another few more minutes, so take advantage of that as well. Stay tuned. More of The Attorneys coming right up.
I'm Tyler Vale with the law firm of Hollis, Wright. In court, attorneys are not allowed to tell juries certain things. For example, we cannot talk about a defendant's net worth, meaning the defendant's ability, resources, or insurance to pay a verdict. In this week's Legal 411, we're answering the question, why can't lawyers talk about a defendant's net worth to a jury? Rule 403 of the Alabama Rules of Evidence states, although relevant, evidence may be excluded if its probative value is substantially outweighed by the danger of unfair prejudice, confusion of the issues, or misleading the jury, or by considerations of undue delay, waste of time, or needless presentation of cumulative evidence. Long-standing Alabama cases have held that the net worth of a defendant falls under this catch-all rule. The reasoning behind the rule is that if a jury knows a defendant is wealthy, then the jury might award more money to the plaintiff. And this goes one step further. If an attorney makes any remarks that suggest the defendant is responsible because he is rich and the plaintiff is poor, that can be grounds for a new trial. If you're ever on a jury, the reality in our state is this. In almost every lawsuit that goes to trial, the attorneys representing both the plaintiff and the defendant have already looked at whether there is sufficient insurance coverage or assets to satisfy a verdict. The reality is this. The parties would not pursue a civil lawsuit if damages could not be paid after a jury returns a verdict. So even though lawyers cannot mention the net worth of a defendant during a trial, there could still be resources available to pay a verdict in court. Please remember, your call, email, or text to the attorneys is free. All of us at Hollis Wright want to help answer your questions on real issues you face. Remember, a competent lawyer will respond to every question you send in. That's our pledge and promise to you.
Welcome back into the Attorneys, our final segment. If you have a question, go ahead and take advantage of the opportunity to pass that along. We'd love to get your feedback. A question we have here, what happens if I have a valid license to carry a concealed weapon from another state and I'm stopped in Alabama while carrying that concealed weapon?
That is a good question. Alabama has reciprocity with most other states in the country. Most states have gun laws that tell us how you can possess and carry that firearm. A person with a valid license in another state or a valid permit in another state may possess and carry their weapon in Alabama as long as they comply with Alabama's laws on how to possess and carry that weapon. So it's important, if you're traveling state to state and you possess a firearm, you carry it in your car, to know what those other states require of their permit holders.
Right. What do you see, and I know your practice is a little more focused on criminal defense, but do you see Second Amendment claims, or do you kind of follow the law of the Second Amendment to stay abreast of kind of where things are from a gun perspective in Alabama?
I do, and recently I was associated in an appeal case. It was a direct Second Amendment carry case, which gave me an opportunity to brush up on how we currently view the Second Amendment in this country, and specifically in Alabama.
What happens if you are arrested? Do you have the ability to, and your gun's taken away during an arrest? Let's say you're exonerated, you're found not guilty, charges are dropped, it's null prost, whatever. Do you have the ability to go get that firearm back from law enforcement?
It really depends on what the crime was that you're originally charged with. But ultimately, if the offense was dismissed or you were found not guilty, you have an absolute right to go back and obtain that firearm at the conclusion of the case. It may take you some time. In a recent case that I was involved in, it took a court order. I had to go back to my judge to get an order from the court before a sheriff's deputy would release my client's firearm. But yes, ultimately you should be able to get that gun back.
And as it relates to cases that you see most commonly in the realm of firearms, what is it that you see most often? Is it just guns that have been used in some type of criminal concept?
Most of the cases that involve guns that I see are one of two things: either drugs with guns, or guns that result in some injury, murder cases, attempted murder, where the gun is being discharged in a hostile way.
How do you, I'm sorry, go ahead, Dan.
I was just curious, everybody seems to be an expert on these matters, and really most of the time we all don't know what we're talking about. So I'm just curious as to where is the most confusion out there when it comes to the issue of gun rights and when you can carry, when you can't. What is it where the conventional wisdom may be this, but it's way off base? Where's the most confusion with this issue?
Well, but the most confusion comes in the concept of possession. We asked the question earlier about my girlfriend, my wife, owning a firearm. And yes, it may be another person may own that gun. They may have purchased that gun. It may be in their car. But possession is a varied concept. It takes in joint and sole possession.
Right.
It takes in actual and constructive possession. So possession is really the hot item. That's what we litigate most of the time. I have a gun on the back seat of my car. Am I actually in possession of it? If I'm the driver of my vehicle, I'm assumed to know what's in my vehicle and therefore to be in possession of that gun. If it's my wife's car and it's in the glove box and maybe I know that it's there, but it's not in my possession, that's the issue. possession is the issue.
Let me ask you this. How do you advise somebody, let's say somebody is convicted of a felony and they have a gun, they know they have it in their house and it's theirs, or a domestic violence event, and they have a firearm. What recommendations do you make as a lawyer as to what you should or should not do with reference to those firearms?
Well, there's a legal requirement when somebody is arrested. One of the typical standard conditions of bonds is that you don't possess a firearm. And so most of the time I will tell my clients, if you've been charged with a felony offense, a condition of bond is to not have a firearm, that we need to move those firearms someplace else. Maybe it's to mom and dad's house, maybe it's to your brother, your best friend, but the best thing is to get them out of the house.
We have just a few minutes remaining, but I want to give both of you the opportunity. Just a final thought from you, and we'll let you go first. Just 2 or 3 things you want to leave our viewers with tonight.
Well, with anything in the world of law, it's important to know your rights. Most people get in trouble in the world of guns because they simply don't know their rights. They assume that the right to bear arms comes with certain innumerable rights, and they just don't know what those are. We have a right to carry a firearm. That's a right that's guaranteed by law. How you carry that is important. Open carry, we're all there. Alabama's an open carry state. But once you start to conceal that weapon, it becomes more dangerous. Police, law enforcement, they're protecting us, they're fighting for their lives as well, so that the hidden gun becomes the problem.
Yeah, you know, I've always just personally been fascinated by the topic of the Second Amendment and the right to bear arms, and it's something I believe is super important, that we have the right, if we desire to be able to bear arms and to own firearms, but it has to be tempered by the realities of the real world, which are felony convictions and domestic violence convictions. Those folks don't need to have firearms, and we don't need to have firearms in a circumstance where we're putting our law enforcement and our federal agents at a disadvantage. So there's a fine line there, and there's a lot of litigation over those issues that I just raised. So it's a fascinating issue, fascinating topic. If you run into these circumstances, or you need help with reference to the Second Amendment or criminal-related issue related to guns, you want to go to a guy like Michael who knows what they're doing, and that's why we bring the experts on the show. So thank you for being on the show.
Very welcome.
Interesting conversation. Thank you both for being with us. Thank you for joining us as well. As we wrap things up, here's how you can get in touch with the firm. Also find Hollis Wright on Facebook as well as Twitter. We appreciate you being with us, and we'll look for you next time right here on The Attorneys.
Thanks for watching The Attorneys, sponsored by Hollis Wright.